darks. I mean, there is no, I think that there is still no light at the end of the tunnel. So we are still in the dark. There are still a lot of violations going on. And as Bablu pointed out, the perpetrators and the officials against whom there are several cases of, killing are still roaming around. And in such a situation, whether it's possible at all for the victims and the witnesses to speak out on specific cases is doubtful. Therefore, as we saw in the case of Punjab, where there's, I mean, it's a very really protracted situation of human rights violations. Perhaps in Manipur, it's going to be even more so. Documentation of the human rights violations, that is something that needs to be, that needs to go on and that needs to be strengthened. As Bablu was telling me that, most of the documentation which is there, it is basically stories of the victims. So there are no documentary FIRs and post-mortem reports and things like that. That is still lacking. That is one way ahead I still clearly I see. Then the second is the kind of what we heard from the extrajudicial victims' families, the collective healing process. That's a must. That must go on, and that's one thing that even while we seek long-term justice, it is important for the victims to get some healing and to be able to survive. That's important, and that should also be strengthened. And as here again, I mean, what I'm reminded of, what the officers are saying, that any kind of cases against the army is going to demoralize the army. So here again, I would like to draw a similar. I mean, why it's important for the healing process is to keep the morale of the victims up, and to make sure that there is hope yet for the victims, so that this healing process is something very important. Then another thing that together with this, even while we seek retributive justice, restorative justice is also equally important. And what Bablu was pointing out, as compensation, even while now compensation is given, he was suggesting that it should be it should be in the form of pensions, so that families are able to at least recover, at least if it is a member of the family who's been earning, who the family has lost due to violation and killing, that family is able to at least economically be able to survive. And that kind of a restorative justice, not just in economic terms, but also in psychological trauma healing, that's important, that must go on. And this, the whole question of perpetrators being around, I don't know whether it is possible to take it up with the Supreme Court in this case, that all these cases which are pending, and and seek a directive from the Supreme Court for those who are accused being taken out of Manipur for a short time, even when this whole hearing and the documentation is going on, whether that is possible. And as you say that the Supreme Court has clearly directed the CBI to create conditions for investigation. One of the things that Sanjay pointed out is that for the transitional justice, what is required is that the acute intimidation that exists now should be it should go away. I mean, that intimidation should come down, and then only it is possible to start off on some kind of a transitional justice process. One of the things that has to be kept in mind is that in the truth-seeking process, is that there are many shades of truth. And in fact, what Shiv was saying, truth becomes meaningful, it is true only when there are many shades of truth. So this we should look out for. I mean, certainly, that there's another side, what the state says, what the government is saying, what the army is saying, that these are insurgencies, these are challenging the Indian state and the integrity of India, and that is the truth from their side. There is another truth there. So, and there is another truth from the victim family's side. So, in between these two, there could be other shades of truth, and that is something that we have to keep in mind. The other, the South African example that came out, and there were four different commissions. It's not just so. We have to also think about. I mean, we have mostly talked about the extrajudicial killings, but we have not really talked a lot about the cases of rape and sexual violence against women by the security forces, and that is another aspect. I mean, in fact, in Kashmir, at one point in time, the Kashmiri groups appealed to the Indian government to at least look into the cases of sexual violence. That is something that the Kashmiris thought was more important than the killings and the encounters and things like that. So these two, the extrajudicial killings and the sexual violence against women and the rapes, whether there has to be two separate processes. Are these going to be two separate processes, or are these going to be one process? And also the whole question of I mean, this whole that also in his presentation we saw that lack of development, militancy and insurgency are given as excuses for development. And I think that in the the justice process that we are talking about, and we want to seek out justice, it can also be focused on this whole question of question of development, question of access to services for the victims and others in general. We have to, I mean, whether the justice process is going to be focused on extrajudicial killings, or it is going to also talk about sexual violence, it is going to talk about the development processes, governance in general. So Manipur is is branded by the Indian media as a failed state. That's something. So there is a serious question of governance. So on governance as well, whether there is going to be any truth seeking, or who's responsible for this? Who's responsible for the lack of governance in Manipur is something that needs to be included. Then the good example he gave of the dominant narratives on the what it says on the Wikipedia. That also we should focus on how to change this narrative. We should concertedly. I mean, one of the paths to transitional justice is to strongly put forth the question, the truth as we see it, as the victims see it. That is something to change the narratives of the insurgency and human rights violations in Manipur. And I mean, very clearly, Manipur and Punjab and Kashmir are the high points of violations, brutality, torture. But these are systemic in the Indian police system, Indian judicial system. This is, I mean, you can see. Of course, these areas are definitely the worser situations of the result of lack of respect for human dignity and human rights by the Indian authorities. But then all these things, police brutality, for example, exists across India. Of course it is worse in Manipur and Kashmir, and so Manipur, as Shiv was saying, is can lead the way to for us to analyze the Indian state as it is. So even while we talk about transitional justice in Manipur, we need to locate that in the wider Indian situation of the history of the Indian state and situation in India at present. So there's a larger picture. So Manipur is just one tip of the iceberg, and Kashmir and Punjab and others. But then beneath that tip of the iceberg, there's a large iceberg which is, floating around the sea of the ocean that India, what India is called. And finally, rehabilitation schemes, of course, wherever they will be there, if there is at all through the Supreme Court process, if there is in any way the reparations question will come, and there will be all these schemes of the government will say all these schemes are already there, and the victim families will be compensated and things like that. That again is something that the civil society has to make sure that victims actually get these are to some extent compensated economically for the losses they have incurred. Then finally, I think as I was talking to you, even while we try to get the Supreme Court or the government to initiate a formal truth-seeking process, there has to be an informal process as well at the level of the civil society. The civil society must initiate truth-seeking, truth-telling, and truth-listening by the by those who can in some way represent the side of the perpetrators, the Indian Army, the security forces, the Manipur police and others. So that can pave the way for some kind of, that's also a great healing process. I mean, the grief sharing that Sanjay was talking about. So the grief sharing in front of those who used to be with the army or the security forces, can go a long way in assuaging the grief of the victim families. And we should we should try and identify sympathizers within the army, security forces, the police, etc., and initiate a process of informal process of the victim families telling the truth to these people, and these people listening the truth as the victim families said. I think these are the issues I could make out in today's discussion. If there is anything, we can. Yeah.
Thank you. I am not an academic. I'm also not a wannabe, donor-driven NGO diplomat. I'm a good old activist. This is my 47th year of human rights activism. I started in 1971. And I haven't lost any of my zest for what I do, because to me, the pain is still as raw as it was in 1971, when I first investigated killings of alleged Maoist students in West Bengal as part of the APDR, the Association for Protection of Democratic Rights, which was then 4 people in Delhi and 3 in Calcutta. That was the size of the organization, not even 2 hands. There's a beautiful passage from Macbeth. And I initially believed in that first passage, which said that a little water could wash your hands of the odium of the murder. Lady Macbeth telling Macbeth. But subsequently, after the murder of King Duncan, Lady Macbeth tells Macbeth that all the perfumes of Arabia will not help. This is the situation of India and impunity. All the perfumes, all the truth commissions, all your commissions of inquiry, and it's, Professor Murthy, it's 274 commissions as of last count across state and national, all the Joker commissions in different states. I actually made a count before I went to Gandhi, the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions, sat down on the web and noted them painstakingly. Didn't even have an intern at that point of time to help. Let me take first the South African model. I don't know why the South African model was then, and I would have liked Shiv to be here. It completely leaves the elephant out of the room, and all of you are leaving the elephant out of the room, which is the political transition period and the situation in South Africa. The white apartheid regime was still in control. It could have turned the clock back any time. Paul Smoor negotiations notwithstanding. The army was under the control. The whole security establishment was controlled. Umkhonto we Sizwe, the armed wing of the ANC, could set off a few little barrel bombs up and down the countryside, not too far from the Tanzanian or Zimbabwe border, but not anywhere else. So it was part of the negotiation that there would be no retribution, that there would be no vengeance, that they would create a vehicle for allowing this situation. Don't listen to me. Read the testimony of Gillian Slovo, Joe Slovo's daughter, Ruth First's daughter, white Jewish intellectuals who supported the ANC. Ruth First was killed by the South African intelligence. See Gillian Slovo's critique of the South African Commission. See Steve Biko's widow's critique of the South African Commission. I can give you tons of other documents. It was purely an instrumentality created by Western powers to help the transition without a bloodletting that would have taken place as in the Congo in the past or elsewhere in the past. So it was useful. I'm not criticizing it, I'm just saying. But to extrapolate that specific political experience into the situation in Manipur is Allahu Akbar, Jesus Christ, Hey Ram, Guru Nanak, Zoroaster, anybody else? Let me declaim anybody else. So that is absolutely out. I could go on, and I've done tons of homework on the South African Commission. And I didn't get a contract with the South African Commission, but been to South Africa thrice, twice, one for the racism conference and twice on behalf of the British Council to exactly talk about these things. I think the first guarantee, if any truth and reconciliation has to give you, is that there must be guarantees of non-recurrence. Where is the guarantee of non-recurrence? Will you take away the whole concept of official and sovereign immunity from the Constitution? Will you take away 197? Will you take away 45 CRPC? Nobody's talked about these things. There's absolutely no legal leg standing in this room since the morning. Nobody's talked about this. You're talking about compensation. Do you know that India has made a declaration on the right to compensation when it signed the Compensation Convention? And the Supreme Court in Ahmedabad, Yusufbhai, otherwise known as the, Swaminarayan bomb blast case, when they were acquitted, when they came for compensation after 17 years and 3 years of three of them under sentence of death, said compensation is at our discretion and is not available to you guys. 17 years is, thank you very much, please go home. The Supreme Court did a Rip Van Winkle Act, or should I say Kumbhakarna Act for the Indian audience, which is similar to being Rip Van Winkle. Where is compensation in this country? So you're not talking about compensation. You're not talking about non-recurrence through the changes in the law. What are you talking about the Armed Forces Special Powers Act? Balderdash, fiddlesticks. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, a decent guy, sets up 5 committees on Kashmir. One of the commissions is on law and order, headed by no less a man than the former Vice President of India, Mr. Hamid Ansari. They recommend the removal of Armed Forces Special Powers Act from Kashmir, not anywhere else, the most hot potato in their basket, in a period when Kashmir was on the boil, not as it is now because you've clobbered them into submission. Absolutely clobbered them into submission. How long is a different matter. You can't keep people always under the jackboot. But the second was the Veerappa Moily Administrative Reforms Commission. Please read the report, the law and order report of it. What is the Veerappa Moily Commission? It should go. Third, the Reddy Commission, of which Sanjay Hazarika was a member. I didn't appear on for behalf of it because of you guys, you Manipuri friends. Apunba Lub said boycott it. So I said I shall respect the Manipur civil society and boycott it. Though I did the second report of on the Armed Forces Special Powers Act to the UN Human Rights Committee, and the third periodic report mentions me in the summary records. Mentions me in the summary records. What has happened? 3 governmental commissions, not some stupid Boy Scout, Girl Guide, NGO, wet behind the ears clowns. Government guys who recommend that it go. And it doesn't go. So what am I trusting the government for? Rubber dubber dub, 3 men in a tub. I'm angry. What? I mean, are you guys complete willing suspension of disbelief? Can you trust the government after this? Your government. 93 October, Beach Bihar. You're talking about the NHRC. First chairperson who wanted to appear to be good, but a very sharp and crafty man. I'm in Srinagar. Those days I was part, as I said, of the furniture of Edu's Hotel in Srinagar. I was the only non-Kashmiri or the non-foreign journalist sitting there. They said they don't even want Indians. I got kidnapped once saying that we don't want Indians, human rights activists or not. And it was only when the top leadership, including Syed Ali Shah Gilani, intervened on my behalf that the stupid boys left me. It was Ed Gargan who helped me, the then New York Times correspondent. Otherwise they came to pick me up. It was Ed who kept gassing with them, trying to halt them while the receptionist rang up Gilani's house in the Hurriyat conference and held them at bay. So I owe my backside to Peter Heinlein and Ed Gargan. Peter Heinlein was the then Voice of America correspondent, and between these two Yanks, they saved my bacon. Literally. Otherwise, the militants would have got me. They said, we don't want any bloody Indian, that's all. For or against us. A curse on all you jokers. Beach Bihara. I immediately rushed to Beach Bihara. I write a report. It's the Time magazine puts out a report, the Philadelphia Inquirer puts a report, and the New York Times, thanks to Ed, puts out a report. 17 BSF officers are indicted. Because it becomes an international issue, the NHRC takes cognizance. Otherwise, it's supposed to be not taking cognizance of the armed forces of the Union, which includes the BSF. So suddenly it finds its voice. Or they have an otolaryngologist who suddenly gives them back their voice. And they intervene. And they ask me for advice as to who should be the lawyer if we go to the Supreme Court. So I approach Nariman. Nariman says, I'm too busy. So I approach Rajiv Dhawan. Rajiv Dhawan says, fine, I'll do it. The case is, NHRC intervenes in the NHRC. What happens behind the scene? I don't know. The case is withdrawn without reference to the complainant, Mr. Ravi Nair, from the Supreme Court. Thank you very much. So much for impunity, so much for justice in the Supreme Court. Now you trust Madan Lokur, very good. I don't trust any judge. I'm not casting aspersions on a particular judge. I just don't trust the system. I just don't trust the system. This is the same Supreme Court which said habeas corpus doesn't apply. I was in jail in the cooler during the emergency, counting bars for a year. And when we heard the judgment, habeas corpus doesn't count. Until 2 years ago, until the Puttaswamy judgment, they couldn't even say, sorry, thank you very much. It took them 35, 40 years to say sorry, which should have been overwritten immediately. What are you guys believing in the system for? rubbing the magic lamp, maybe some genie is still going to come out. Keep rubbing, rubbing, rubbing. I have a long shopping list, but I shall not go into it in too deep. This thing maybe 92 cases to be investigated out of the 1500 and plus cases. When are you going to get justice? There's an old proverb in Hindi, which all of you should memorize. It's not a recent proverb, it's a very old proverb. And I translated it in English for you. The law in this life, justice in the afterlife. That is the Indian system. The law in this life, justice in the afterlife. This is not invented by me. It's an old Eastern UP saying going back to the 15th century. Anybody from Balia would tell you what it means if you are from Balia. Case closure, because there is no witness protection program. You made amendments in 1998 on the CRPC for victim protection. But what about witness protection? Where it is the state is held, thank you very much, you are quick to make the amendments. And if you read the Manipur committee report, God Almighty, have nightmares. Please read the Manipur committee, it's still available on the web, on the Home Ministry website. He says, do all this. Thank you very much. You are guilty until you prove you're innocent. Now the state doesn't have to prove you're guilty. This is the Home Ministry's Criminal Justice Reforms Committee, headed by a Chief Justice of 2 former High Courts and a member of the National Human Rights Commission. Ya Allah. Where is the sustainable justice, which is one of the pillars of any truth commission or reconciliation machinery? Where are you going to prosecute any single person? Where is the prosecution for anybody in the 84 riots until these 2 recent prosecutions have taken place? There are literally hundreds of cases pending in the lower courts. Satnam mentioned about Gill. I am mentioned by name in the representation given to Narasimha Rao that these human rights activists are stopping policemen from doing their duty. By name I am mentioned. Because I named, apart from Gill, 2 other crooks who haven't got enough publicity. One is Azhar Alam, who created a private army called the Alam Sena and killed people in the Punjab. And for that he was rewarded and sent to Kashmir to kill a few more in Kashmir, because he was their little Sarkari Musalman, government's own Uncle Tom. And that guy, what's his name? Sumed Singh Saini, who became Director General of Police after being named in number of habeas corpus petitions pending in the High Court. And done by the Akali Dal government, of which when Jaswant Singh Khalda died, and the documentation done by his other colleague J.S. Dhillon, if you remember, was then part of the human rights wing of the Shiromani Akali Dal. They couldn't even prosecute the guy, and they rewarded him and honored him by making him DGP. This guy whose fingers were, you don't even have to look far for the evidence. Yeah, exactly. They made him an MLA. Thank you very much. After having been a cop, he's trying to be, who was that guy? Michael Caine in Clute, doing encounters, shoot to kill guys, have gun will travel, things like that. I just want to make a final few points. I've got tons. I've made about 15 pages of notes before coming to this meeting on different issues that I saw as the headings. What happened to Uttam Kumar's case, Manipur? You still believe them? Sanamamcha's case, did you still believe them? The High Court ordered compensation. A Major Mahendra comes inside the Human Rights Commission and says no compensation. Have you anybody found out whether the compensation was actually given after the High Court ordered 3 lakhs compensation? In one case you couldn't give compensation, you're believing in the state was going to give compensation on hundreds of cases. Come on, man. I know that the Hindu mind is lousy at memory. It is not a historical mind. The only people in this part of the world which has an historical memory is the Sikhs. Neither the Muslims or the Christians or the Hindus have any historical memory in this country. Where fact begins and myth ends, nobody knows. And you believe this? And the army is not a monolith? Come on. Hello. 1993, when I started attacking the army first did a charm offensive. There was then a very distinguished lieutenant general in charge of arm track, the Army Training Command, General Seth, a very well-spoken general, who entertained me a couple of times for coffee and at the USI, United Services Institution, which is the army. All the old folks in the army have the little chota pegs there. I was told I could do some training for the army. So I said, yeah, sure, I'm happy to. I'd like the Indian Army to shape up to international humanitarian law standards. So I suddenly was asked to to test me the UN peacekeeping contingents going from India to their training. I happily did it. They were very happy. The ICRC was thrilled that I was doing some humanitarian because they hadn't yet got their leg in. They got in their leg in much later. And they got it. Then General Nambia made the mistake. The UN force commander in former Yugoslavia, who was Lieutenant General in the Indian Army, a good army man, made the mistake of asking me to go to the counterinsurgency training command of the army in Kashmir, in a small place called Riasi, which has nothing except guys who are trained how to bump off people. And I, along with the then military correspondent of the NDTV, and a very nice old academic from Jammu University, Balraj Puri, were 3 of the panelists there, along with a few army guys. I decided I'm going to speak truth, not pull any punches. And I knew I wasn't going to be re-invited. But I said in my 45 minutes, I was going to sock it to them because I knew Balraj Puri is going to be a sweet old man and say, please don't do this, that, etc. The journalist, Nitin Gokhale, being a former man, army man, would do Paulson butter and Amul butter and nothing else. So I decided I was going to call a spade a spade. I went through all the cases then pending in the Jammu and Kashmir High Court on army atrocities, where the High Court, after finding initial findings, finding prima facie cases that's held, asked for, in 46 cases, asked for permission to prosecute from the central government to the army. 46 cases at that point of time. Ille po, niyat, no, nahi, whichever language. What do you say in Manipuri? No. No permission. I didn't ask. High Court asked. No permission. The case asked the Jammu and Kashmir Civil Society, where is the number now? And then they clean themselves up. A colonel puts ketchup on himself, says he's got injured. He's famously called as the ketchup colonel. Go back home and Google it. The ketchup colonel says it's blood and collects bounty on killing so-called militants who are innocent villagers picked up from their villages. Shades of Manipur. You've forgotten it. How many innocent civilians just picked up and killed? They didn't use ketchup there because even that they didn't have to use there. In Kashmir, at least, they had to put ketchup to show it was blood in the photographs. And have you forgotten Chitty Singh Pura? where the innocent Sikhs were taken and shot as militants. And there's a finding by the CBI, not me, not some stupid clown NGO, not some idiot human rights activist. The CBI, their own institution, because there was a clean, honest officer, one of these rare things that you have to look for with a microscope. Zeiss, good German microscope. You have to look for. He actually gives a finding that it was cold-blooded murder, and the Supreme Court lets them on by sending it to the Army Tribunal, which says nothing's going to happen, nothing is happening. And the Parveena Masood case, and the Kundan Poshpora case. How many more cases do you want me to take? I can give you a list which is running into a few hundred pages of cases that have gone to the courts, district courts, high court, Supreme Court, where the army is involved in Jammu and Kashmir, and not a single thing has happened. Come on, you're an army, this thing you mentioned. No, I'm not saying, I also come from army. No, I also come from, my cousins are in the army. But I'm just telling you that if the army doesn't know that serving officers go to the court, yesterday the Supreme Court threw out this army petition of officers. Serving officers go to the court without permission from the JAG, from the Judge Advocate General's office and their command headquarters. In this case, Chandi Mandir, Northern Command. I know the army damn bloody well. It's a violation of the Army Act. They should have been sacked on the spot using 311 of the Constitution. And then you have this loudmouth Bipin Rawat, the Chief of Army Staff, who's got the gift of the gab, and every time he opens his mouth, he puts his big foot in. He said something yesterday, this clown. He's been, what was it? Clinton or Obama sacked the force commander, US Army NATO commander in Afghanistan just for making off the key comments, which were not even on record. Just because the correspondent, CNBC correspondent mentioned it, saying this is what he said. Who's running the state? You're calling Pakistan an army state? Who's running the state here? Have you forgotten the story where Shekhar Gupta put on the front page of the Indian Express that a whole army command walked through Delhi without permission of North Bloc or South Bloc? Can you imagine you running a combat command through the capital, Washington, without the president's office knowing? Are you trying to be Bonaparte? And nothing happens? So don't think it's only Allah, Americans and the army in Pakistan. Here it is Doval, Amit Shah, Modi and this stupid Rawat. There they have 3 clowns, we have 4 stooges here. Larry, Joe and Curly Moe. If you know American comic movies and television series. Take the issue of gender justice. What happened to Kundan Poshpora? One NGO present here has as his chairman a man who hid the Kundan Poshpora thing under the table. I went to Kundan Poshpora. I couldn't get a women's group to go with me. How could I interview Kashmiri women about what happened to them sexually in an Islamic society? So I took a film actress, Suhashini Muley. She still acts in documentaries and ads and all this kind of thing. Because I couldn't get any women's activists. They said, if we go with you, our NGO funding will be stopped. FCRA will be stopped. So no women's organization was willing to go with me, period. So I took who was an activist, but she was a film actress. So I pulled her out of Bombay and said, come, you can give up your film for some time and come with me. Someday you were an activist, now I shall rebaptize you back into activism. We did the report. Nothing happened. Until today, nothing has happened. The district court tried to reopen the court after 30 years. It's been stymied. No permission for prosecution. A whole village of women, the males were sent out, and the women were raped or molested. Any woman from the ages of 12 to 60. Read the report. I'm not, read the report and submissions made to the district court. Read even Wajayat Habibullah's lousy report. Because he also couldn't whitewash it beyond a certain point. Where is the yelling from the women's gender justice groups? Where is the yelling on Parveena Masood? Where is the yelling on Manorama Devi? Or the Kangla fort? All of you guys have memory, which is very, very convenient. Very convenient. Where is the Supreme Court able to implement any, even constitutional amendments? The 42nd Amendment took away a lot of our rights during the emergency. Please remember the Janta government, subsequently the Morarji Desai government, did the 44th Amendment to the Constitution, trying to restitute, bring back many of our rights. However, it did not do minuscule dotting the I's and crossing the T's, which is a big mistake in Indian legislation. One major clause was the necessity that in all preventive detention legislation, you must have judicial officers or ex-judicial officers on the committee to review detentions. It has not been implemented until today. Gazetted, implemented meaning gazetted. Gazetted by today, until today. 1978, it was passed by joint houses of parliament, by unanimously, because even the opposition Congress party supported it. It was not addressed in the NSA cases anywhere. Every time you raised it in the NSA case, the Supreme Court said it is for the parliament to take it up. You can take up everything under the sun, but when your own rights have been circumscribed, you don't take it up because you don't want to challenge the state. I don't believe the Indian state. I believe only people's power. I believe in democracy. I believe, but only people's power. As Jayaprakash Narayan would say, जन सत्ता पे लोक सत्ता का अंकुश होना चाहिए. On state power, there must always be people's powers control. Now, you can't call JP an anti-national. Wish they could. All my ideas come from him. So I was one of his 12 anointed student leaders between 74 and 76, before I went into the cooler. So where is the accountability? Intelligence Bureau? Can you imagine the Intelligence Bureau of any country not coming under any legislative and parliamentary control, not coming under any comptroller and auditor general control? That's why you created a monster called Mr. Doval. And I'll name him, and you can put it out on television, on radio and everything. I keep naming him everywhere. Archdeacon of evil. The wannabe Heydrich of India. And to facilitate his takeover, and I'm not being paranoid, wait for the next 6 months. This is the last days of the Weimar Republic. Read Adrian Bullock's brilliant work, A Study in Tyranny. And if you don't read Adrian Bullock's Study in Tyranny, it's too academic for you, then read William Shirer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich as an easy paperback reading. But it gives you the same message. He has a whole paramilitary force under his command which has no act. At least the BSF have an act. The army has an act. The Navy has an act. The Air Force has an act. This SSB, Special Security Bureau, of more than 50,000 men today across the country, in very key areas, has no act. They are in the twilight zone. Who's controlling them? Not the Home Ministry. The Intelligence Bureau itself does not report to the Home Ministry. It reports now to the Prime Minister's office, so-called, what is it called, euphemistically? Cabinet Secretariat. Thank you very much. It's all coming out, tumbling out now in the CBI case, some of it. But I've been saying this for years. Read current magazine, Praveen Donti's piece, and read my pieces on the Intelligence Bureau and the Economic and Political Weekly. I've been putting myself out in the corner, out on a limb, calling a spade a spade. I know I've suffered for this. In the last, since 1998 and 2003 particular, they put me through the mill. I'm still standing. So these guys, are you going to trust with the Truth Commission? You're going to trust with the Reconciliation Commission? The Assam Rifles, their top brass for the last 2 generations will have to go to jail. Justice Shiksha is a polite man, unlike me. Who created the Kuki national groups? The Intelligence Bureau and the Assam Rifles. You want the evidence? I'll give it to you. In fact, if Ramon was alive, he would have told me this. In fact, I was sitting down and taking an oral history before he died. This was the former Director General of Border Security Force who suddenly had a mea culpa moment and enlightenment under the Bodhi tree after retirement. He clashed with me many times in Kashmir when he was head of intelligence for the BSF in Kashmir. I am only saying that here, no institution, the media, all you have to switch on to the media. When it comes to the army, gosh, Moses would be jumping up and down. This holy cow you won't touch. And you're prancing around it, not touching it. Yahweh, behold the holy golden calf. And you're not touching it. Which is the prosecution? Tell me. Give me a name. You kidnap a journalist. Who was the former BBC correspondent? Yusuf Jamil. The 3rd Gorkha kidnapped him. They say we don't have him. For 10 days they kept saying we don't have him. Until the Americans and the Brits because of BBC and the Americans because they are Americans. And at that point of time you had a decent State Department Secretary of State who put in all this thing, and then they suddenly, abracadabra, they produced him. Oh, we had him in some small outpost, we found him. Thank you very much. Thank God they didn't bump him off. Yusuf Jamil still lives in Srinagar. I can give you chapter and verse on cases. So where is truth? I do not want retribution. I do not want revenge and vengeance. But I want accountability. I want accountability. I want not some clown coming into a dock and saying, oh, I'm sorry, I killed somebody. Thank you very much. I want justice through the Indian legal system, which properly functions. Has anybody been prosecuted for Veerappans? The whole village is terrorized and killed. Has anybody, and it's not new, I land only by saying this, people tend to forget these things. 100,000 Muslims were killed by the Dogra regiment, then of the Jammu and Kashmir Maharaja, subsequently of the Indian Army, in Jammu, and that was how Jammu was ethnically cleansed of Muslims. Do you know that? Do you know 40,000 Muslims lost their life in the so-called police operation in Hyderabad? Please read Destruction of Hyderabad by A.G. Nurani and read a very honest Indian report in that, which is given as an annexure, Pandit Sundarlal's report, done for the Congress Working Committee, which they suppressed for many years, of how the Muslim General Great Chaudhry, some Chaudhry he was, who killed 40,000 people and looted the mansions of the old royalty of Hyderabad and filled their houses with beautiful artifacts. I am not joking. Go to Kashmir today and then come with me to Chandigarh, of somebody who just finished his tour of duty and come back to Chandigarh or any other home posting. Beautiful walnut furniture, never paid for. Not willow bats, that's cheapskate stuff. Lovely carpets, and enough dry fruits to last you for a couple of years. Not kilos, but sacks. I'm happy to show you. You come with me. I'm not gassing. We'll do some surprise visits and I'll show you. I'll give you the list of officers and we quickly go to their houses after they've come back to northern headquarters. You guys don't have anything to give except somebody, a pineapple and whatever. Yeah. Which I'm sure the Assam Rifles is involved. The regular army, I'm not sure, but the Assam Rifles is quite certain, and it's army officer. After all, I was with you in January in Moreh on the border this year, last year. Last December I was with you in Moreh, and we saw how the good South Indian chettiars were a gang in hand and foot with the bloody Assam Rifles, and that stupid Malayali Assam Rifles was a little thug. So I am only saying, do these kind of seminars. It's useful as an exercise to understand these things and processes. But let's want basic accounting. You want the rule of law in this country? Where is the rule of law? And finally, I'll end with this. This old debate goes out of the smoke depending on what the Supreme Court decides in the next few weeks. There is a petition, after 8 years the Supreme Court has suddenly woken up from its slumber and started hearing the APCLC versus Union of India extrajudicial executions case. For those of you who don't know about it, a single bench said it is mandatory to file an FIR in an extrajudicial execution case. Justice Bilal Naski's in the Hyderabad, Andhra Pradesh High Court. The Police Association challenged it. It was upheld by a DB, done by a conservative but a good judge, Justice Raghuram, who is now director of the National Judicial Academy. It was upheld. The Supreme Court, without going to the petitioners, APCLC, gives an ex parte stay. Ex parte stay. Thank you at the Supreme Court. And then sleeps on the thing for 8 years. And this has just suddenly woken up from its torpor. What if it decides against us? Yesu Masih, Allahu Akbar, Guru Nanak Dev, mujhe kripa kare. I don't believe this. I believe when all of you stop filibustering on this issue, call a spade, tell the judges, the lawyers, the NGOs, the academics that the Indian system ain't working. And if it ain't working, then perhaps we need a new republic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Those are the contrasting Ravis we had as our final concluding session.
Some of the things he said are very well known.
Exactly.
Not that this is all very new.
No.
Here we are discussing not Mr. Ravi Nair, we are discussing Manipur.
On that point, actually, I believe that the Ravi Himadri did a positive summarization of our consultation. Ravi Nair sir did a very well summarization of what we might have missed and we really have to keep in mind. And particularly for us at the Center for Human Rights Studies, where we are, still stuck at the academic level of understanding these very complex, vague concepts and the situations, not just in Manipur, but across India in the past and also across the world. This consultation was completely very, very enlightening. And we hope to now take forward the things we have discussed here today. Sorry, it has been a long day, but for us at the center, it has been a very enlightening day. And we are very confident that we can address something in the report which we are aiming to get out early next year. We would love your collaborations. We would love your suggestions again. Ravi Nair sir, we would love to have your notes because I think we should include them. And we want this report to be something of a collaboration between all of us. And let's try to be hopeful. Let's see what is happening in the Supreme Court. We all are following it. And on that note, thank you so much for coming. We look forward to seeing you again in the near future. Thank you.